Hey everybody, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. We're back with plant spotlights, and today we're focusing on my Queen Anthurium. So let's get started. Before we get started, Brett asked me to remind you to please subscribe to our channel. Right, as always with my plant spotlights, I'm going to take you through the journey that my Queen and I have been through over the last year and a bit, and I'll make sure that I'll give you any top tips of what I've learned over the last year and so on. So I first got it delivered in June 2021. So I ordered this one online from an Instagram grower here in Australia. She's quite a reputable grower over here. So I know that any plant that I get from her is usually of really good quality and is quite nice and healthy. So I purchased it and it got shipped to me in June 2021. And it was actually shipped potted up. So it came in its original pot, which is great because it reduces any shock that the plant would go through in the first place. In case you're not aware, Queensland is up north here in Australia, and Queensland gets to enjoy quite tropical climate, whereas Sydney is further south and our climate is a little bit more temperate, right? So just purely based on the conditions for this plant changing from tropical to more temperate climate, I would expect the plant to go through a bit of shock. So it's great to have it shipped in a pot to eliminate any further shock. So once I got it, really, I just gave it a quick spray with Vitality Plus to make sure there aren't any pests on it. And I didn't even check the root system. I don't want to bother it any more than it absolutely has to at that stage. So I just popped it in my IKEA cabinet. That cabinet is at around 90% humidity, consistent airflow, and a grow light in there. So it's very consistent light levels as well. So I found that any plant that I pop in my cabinet to kind of acclimate usually is having a really easy time. And I was planning on keeping it in that cabinet for forever anyway, so I might as well pop it in there straight away. I don't really have the space to isolate plants when I first got them. I can't really put them aside somewhere and still provide them with good conditions. So I rather put them in the cabinet to make sure that the plant that I just got gets good conditions so it can recover as quickly as possible. And if I do create a crazy pest outbreak with it, then it's absolutely my fault. Can I recommend that? I'm not too sure. Is it realistic that people don't isolate their plants? 100%. I don't think I've ever isolated any of my plants and I haven't had any issues. But if you have the luxury of having plenty of space available with good conditions, then of course, why not isolate it? Anyway, so it took a good 2 months for it to grow its first new leaf, and look, that's totally fine. At the beginning, it would focus on root growth first, right? And it would it dropped a couple of leaves that it was shipped with, which is also totally fine. These leaves are used to growing up in a certain environment. So if you then change the environment, those leaves might suffer a little bit. But any new leaf that is growing in my environment is already used to my environment. So don't worry if a plant drops some leaves if you just got it, right? Just purely the shock of changing conditions and so on might do that. That doesn't necessarily mean that your plant is doomed, right? That's also a reason why I always like to start off with small plants. So these plants and every single leaf that is growing is used to my environment because it grew in my environment. If you get a very large plant that has been growing in a greenhouse or a hothouse at perfect conditions, and then you pop it in your apartment with 50% humidity and not so much light, of course those leaves are going to suffer. Whereas if you grew them in your environment from the get-go, then those leaves are more tolerant to your conditions because that's all they're used to, right? Anyway, kind of going off topic. So I got its first leaf in August 2021. And honestly, over the moon with it. I was a bit worried about the Queen Anthurium. I hear so much on the internet about how finicky it is and how much humidity it likes and, that it just throws random tantrums. I disagree. So far, it's been pretty easy with me. And the only thing that I do have to admit is that the leaves get markings really, really quickly. So when they're first unfurled, just make sure you don't touch them at all. I'll pop a few photos up on screen over here. So it got another leaf in September 21, and then it got another leaf in November 21. And at that stage, I figured I should probably start repotting it, or at least checking out the root system. So I checked with the seller and I asked her what potting medium she used. And it was a medium based on perlite, cocoa peat, and a little bit of sand. So not quite my usual aeroid mix, a little bit more water retentive, but the sand is also giving a great drainage at the same time. So I figured, well, why fix what's not broken? I tried to recreate the existing potting medium a little bit, and I'll pop a video up on screen when I repotted it. I also decided that it needs more room for roots, right? It was already pretty pot bound, but because I have it in my IKEA cabinet and I want to hang it on the back wall of my IKEA cabinet, I can't actually give it a very large pot. That pot just wouldn't really hold onto that grid. So really these 14 centimeter pots that I've got it in right now is pretty much the maximum I can go within my IKEA cabinet. But I still wanted to give the plant more room for roots, so I gave it one of these Grow Vertical poles. So Grow Vertical is a local company over here. They produce these vertical supports. The back is made from recycled plastic, and at the front you just got the mesh, so really similar to my normal poles as well. The benefit of those poles is that because the back is plastic, the surface area of the moss is reduced, which means that the moss is going to dry out less quickly. From what I've heard is the queen really doesn't like to dry out. It likes to have consistent levels of moisture. So I figured that's a really good way for me to expand the volume of growing medium that I've got, by still making sure that it doesn't dry out too quickly, especially because I've got a fan going on in my IKEA greenhouse 24/7 as well. So that airflow would just make the moss pole dry out a little bit faster, but with that plastic backing, it keeps moist quite nicely. And yes, the queen is a climber. I'm not too sure if you can see that, but it has climbed up probably a third or so of its pole. It obviously grows quite slowly compared to some of my philodendron, but I can definitely see some roots going into the pole. So it's definitely really happy with its support, and I can even see one root coming out the top of the support already. So there's definitely a lot of root system within the extension, within that pole in itself, but obviously quite a large root system within the pod as well. It probably needs repotting. It also needs to move out of my cabinet. It's too big for the current cabinet, so I'm planning on giving it its own cabinet just for herself. And when I set it up, I'll definitely start taking you along as well. So after I repotted it, I was actually expecting it to go through a little bit more shock and maybe stop producing leaves, but I was probably also really lucky I repotted it in the middle of spring, summer, right? So I repotted it in November, and in December I already got the next leaf. The next leaf was a little bit smaller than the previous one, but again, I would expect the plant to focus on root growth first rather than pushing out new leaves. In February 2022, it then gave me its first really nice leaf after the repot. And what I really love about Anthuriums is how small these leaves are when they first pop out. So they're teeny tiny, and then over time, and it can take up to 5-6 weeks for it to really properly inflate, like unfurl and then properly inflate. It just grows really, really large. And it's kind of thrilling to see like, oh, how large is this one going to get? Now, that's where the problem lies as well. When the leaf first comes out and it's really small, if you just touch it, or even if you just look at it the wrong way, it will leave a little mark. And then as the leaf expands, these marks become huge, right? So for example, I've got this hole over here. It was the teeny tiniest little hole. You weren't really able to see it when it was small, but when the plant expands, then these holes suddenly become really large. So even, or if you make it like, if you have like a little dent, or like if you have a little scar on that leaf, right, it will really almost deform the leaf. So ideally, when that new leaf comes out, just don't look at it, don't touch it, don't do anything to it. It is the most sensitive plant when it comes to that. That is, at least in my collection, I haven't really experienced anything like that with any of my other plants. Yeah, I'll show you these photos on screen. So in February, end of February 2022, it started unfurling, and then by April 2022, it fully inflated, and it looked just beautiful. So it's so amazing. So I think that was my favorite leaf of that so far. And you can really see that it made a huge jump in size, and I reckon that is because I gave it that larger root system. It took a little while to establish that root system, but once it is established, it really started giving me these large leaves. Then in June 2022, it gave me this leaf on the right over here, the one with the little hole. So that's already where the plant was getting a little bit too large for its cabinet. So I'm really desperate to give it a new one. And then while I was on holidays the other month, it started unfurling this other leaf as well. And as it was unfurling, it was kind of getting stuck behind all of these other leaves. It was getting stuck with some of the other Anthuriums in my cabinet, and the leaves kind of started scarring each other. So there's quite a lot of scarring on this plant. You can see there's like a little indentations and so on. So I think this leaf is never really gonna kind of become really flat and beautiful. I think it's kind of just You know, because it had all of these, because it was touched so much by other leaves as it was unfurling. Unfortunately, I think it's kind of a little bit deformed, but it's still really pretty regardless, and just really gives me that motivation to give it a better location so it can kind of grow uninterruptedly going forward. It has also started giving me some inflorescences. So I've had I think two or three inflorescences at this stage. The first one didn't really go through the female stage, but I collected some pollen. The second one, I tried to pollinate it, but it wasn't really a success. And the third one, unfortunately, unfolded and went through female stage when I was on holidays. So I've got a bit of pollen of that Anthurium in my freezer, and I'm waiting for the next inflow to come up, and hopefully I'll manage to pollinate it fourth time around. So anyway, if not, that's it. But, you know, I do love setting myself a little challenge, and I would love to make some little berries out of this one. I think that would be quite nice to do that. Anyway, we'll see how we go. Apparently, Queen Anthurium isn't quite as easy to pollinate as some of the other Anthuriums, and honestly, I've only really done it successfully 2 or 3 times. So I'm absolutely no expert when it comes to Anthurium pollination, but I'm also working on a video on that one, or at least showing you what I do. So bear with me, that will eventually come out. So what have I learned about this plant over the year that I've been growing it? So first of all, as I said, don't touch it, don't look at it, don't do anything, just leave it to itself. Do not touch the leaves if you're after beautiful leaves. It really loves high humidity. Now, of course, I haven't given it any other conditions. It really moved into my IKEA cabinet on day dot. So I can't really I don't really know what would happen to it if I wouldn't have it in my IKEA cabinet. But just given the way that it has been thriving in my cabinet with 90% humidity, I would expect that, well, that's probably a telltale sign that it really appreciates it. And ultimately, I want my plants to thrive. I don't just want them to survive. I want them to thrive and hold on to as many leaves as possible. Of course, it will yellow, and honestly, I just cut the yellow edges. So you'll see that some of these leaves down here are no longer full leaves. I just cut off the yellow because I just don't like the look of it. So don't beat yourself up about it. Everybody gets yellow leaves. It's totally normal. Leaves have a limited time span, and especially if you're growing them indoors, which is already a challenge, or which is already not its natural preferred environment. So it's totally normal for a plant to not look 100% perfect. Even in nature, they don't look perfect. She is thirsty. So when I got it, I messaged the seller and I asked about how they take care of this plant. And she actually said that she has it growing outdoors. As I said, Queensland, especially far north Queensland, it's very humid outside. So she had it growing outdoors and she watered it daily. Now, that's a great example of how the same plant with 2 different growers, just purely based on the environmental differences, require different care routines. If I would water this daily, it would have probably died by now already. I water it once a week thoroughly, and halfway through the week, I give all of the moss in the pole, as well as the little top moss that I've got on here, a little spray. So I kind of water it twice a week, not daily, right? That doesn't mean that the seller was lying to me. That's legitimately what she does to make her plants grow. But because she's got them outdoors, there's a lot of wind, and and it's not a controlled environment like my cabinet. Of course, the plant would require more water and the substrate would dry out quicker, right? So just keep that in mind. Like whenever somebody tells you water once a week, question like how big is their plant? What environment do they have? What substrate are they using? Just because they water once a week or once a day does not mean that you need to do the same, even though you might be growing the exact same plant. So I water her, 1.5 fish twice a week. If I wouldn't have her in my cabinet with 90% humidity, I would probably have to water her more frequently. As I said, she really doesn't want to dry out. So don't treat her like a monstera, letting her dry out between waterings. Just keep her consistently moist, but of course make sure that there's always aeration and drainage. So you don't want it to, it's not a swamp plant, right? It doesn't want to sit in swampy, muddy substrate. It also likes quite a heavy feed, so I feed her on a stronger dilution. So normally I use my GT Foliage Focus at 5 milliliters per liter of water. With her, I actually give her about 10 milliliters of water, 10 milliliters of fertilizer per liter of water when I water her. And I do that weekly. So every week she gets food and she gets water because she's a beast and I want her to grow and thrive as much as she can. And yeah, I do really think that she appreciates airflow, especially if you do have her in a really high humidity environment. You don't want water droplets on the leaves to form and then stay there and potentially cause any fungus issues. So I've got a fan in my IKEA cabinet that is on 24/7. So there's high humidity, but there's a lot of airflow as well, which also prevents any sort of mold from forming and so on. I actually haven't had any pest issues with her so far. I'm not too sure if I've just been really lucky or whether my IKEA cabinet and the airflow and the humidity in there does a good job at maybe preventing pests from actually being able to thrive. I'm not quite sure, but I haven't had any pest issues. So that's really good news. And yeah, that's really it. So really high humidity, a lot of light, a lot of water, a lot of food, and give her a water retaining but quite aerated substrate. And I think then you don't really have to worry about anything. Should be easy enough, right? No, just kidding. Alrighty, I think that's all I've really got to say. If you're interested in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet and you're wondering whereabouts that lives on a daily basis, please check out this video over here. And Brad and I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much and take care.